Hello and welcome to Gravitas Wins Conversations. When we think of corporate communication, we think only in terms of PowerPoints and bullet list. But slides don't make you memorable. To stand out, you need to master storytelling skills. To explore this further, I'm talking to a guest whose expertise is in telling business lessons in the form of short stories. I've read his book and most of his columns, and without a doubt, he is a master storyteller. I hope you will enjoy this conversation. Hello, Jayaram. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Joseph. I am happy to be here.
Why did you choose a fiction format rather than a very standard non fiction format?
My stories are actually a combination of both. They are based on true episodes, so that makes it
Mm,
nonfiction. But in order to create the stories, because a story needs to have a protagonist, an antagonist, and a conflict and a solution, I actually created these characters. But a lot of my friends who read my book said that they identified these people in their organizations, and people being people, we are the same everywhere. So it's a mixture of both. The themes are nonfiction, the style is fiction.
yeah. As I read through 21 stories, some I felt it is me.
Yes.
In some, yeah, that's the manager that this story is about. So it is very true.
Yes.
Uh, I want to dig deeper into one of the stories, what that story is, how you framed it, and so on and so forth. And I'm choosing the story Pink Envelope. But before we dig into it, how do you source these stories?
Uh, I don't have too many great qualities, but there's one part of my brain which remembers episodes, and it also, brings it out at the most relevant moment. The other great quality I have, again, I told you I don't have too many other great qualities, is that I can bring jokes on the table when something is happening. I can make it so relevant. I am like the court jester. So a lot of my friends would rather call me for a party because at least the party won't be boring. So
Mm.
that's the secret as to where I get this. And I think, for want of doing anything else, I am a voracious reader and I observe people because I enjoy trying to figure out what are the subliminal level motives because of which we act the way we
Mm.
do. So, very
Mm.
often you might hate somebody, but when you understand what is their backstory and the kind of problems they've gone through, maybe somebody's wife has died and things like that, you don't hate them. You actually start sympathizing with them. So, understanding human beings and behavior is so very important if you want to learn to empathize and get along with people.
That's a good segue into the story, the Pink
Mhm.
Envelope.
Mhm.
Would you mind sharing what that story is?
Oh, yeah. That story is really one of my favorites. And
Mm-hmm.
in when I was learning story writing, I was told, that sometimes characters will walk into your story, because
Mm-hmm.
when you plan a story, you plan, what is a story? Let's get back to that first, because many people really don't know this very obvious thing. A story has to have minimum two people. One is the protagonist, and the other is the antagonist. And there has to be a desire. So the protagonist desires something very badly, and the antagonist is the protagonist desires, the antagonist pushes back. So what happens is, between the two there is a conflict. If there is no conflict, there is no story. The data point I had on this particular story, the pink envelope, it's very fascinating. If you look at the genesis of the story, many years ago when I was working in a company in Kota, I don't want to name the company, I had a boss who used to shout at everybody. For the smallest things he would shout, and he would not shout at you. Let's say he wanted to give you a
Mm.
message. He had his favorite whipping horses. He would call them and shout at them, and you got the message. So
Mm.
that stuck in me. And when I was writing the story, somewhere that guy came into my peripheral vision, saying, "Yeah, there used to be this guy who was shouting. Why can't I write a story around him?" And that's the only data point I had, Joseph. And I built this whole story
Mm.
around that. So then I asked myself this question, and this question I asked myself even then when I was 20 and a half years old. That's the first job. That he's shouting and he's getting away because everybody is damn scared of him and they want to retain their jobs. Well, what happens if some kid is there from a well-to-do family who doesn't have to worry about the money, and he shouts back at him publicly? you know, what happens to this guy? So these are the only two data points. And I use that to create the story. So this is a story of a HR person working in an IT company, and his wife also is from, both of them are from the Management Institute. And I created her as somebody from the Management Institute because I had to facilitate a lot of dialogue between the two, that she becomes a sounding
Mm,
board.
mm.
So it's important to bring somebody who's been in the corporate world. And then she, when they have a child, she gives up a job and becomes a part-time trainer. So I had to also bring that element in, because if he moves his job, the wife can't move very easily, she's already working somewhere. So I had to create this in the thinking that when he moves, she must be ready to move. So I had to make her a part-time trainer because of the child. And this man at an ASCOM conference in Chennai, he meets another owner of a company who tells him, "Why don't you come and join me? I need somebody like you." You know, I got one of my jobs in this manner. So I brought that element into the story. And this happened at an ASCOM conference in Bombay. And he comes home and his wife tells him, "Listen, our baby is old. Every time that the going gets tough, you tend to leave the company. So, you know, you cannot keep changing jobs, you know, and she needs stability." He says, "Don't worry, this job I will stay." So he makes a commitment and they shift to Chennai. And he's doing well, you know, with in the job. And the boss, who's the owner of the company, keeps telling him that he's more than an HR guy to him and things like that. But one thing he notices is that the gentleman has hired a lot of people from IITs and the best premium institutions, and then once in a while he will shout at them publicly. So one day his wife notices that her husband is feeling low. Earlier he was feeling very high. So she asks him, why not? Because these wives are the first people to notice when your mood is off.
Yes.
So he tells her, "Listen, I don't understand, but I got this floating anxiety because he shouts at people. So my worry is one day if he shouts at me, I won't be able to take it." That's the fear he has, you know, his worst nightmare, as one would call it. So she talks to him and tells him, "Why don't you find out more about this owner of your company? Why does he behave the way he does?" So this person then
Mm,
goes and he has made friends with the CFO. So he asks the CFO and said, "You can bring in elements in a story either through a dialogue or as a backstory, or the author can tell the backstory. Here I chose to make the CFO tell him this." And he tells him, "Listen, this owner of ours is the youngest son in a family. His two elder brothers have studied at Harvard. He has not studied at Harvard. And, you know, his uncle gives him all the business. So he's not worried about getting business because uncle runs a big IT company and we are the back end for them. But I think the CFO tells him, I think he has a complex that within the family is not done very well. And one of the reasons why he hires so many IITs and MBAs is because he wants to make up for that by telling the family, see, you guys will do, but I have got so many of these IITs and MBAs working for me." And then he says, you know, he thinks that we need the job very badly. So he shouts to control us. And here's his insecurity. Because again, I drew from
mm,
my reading. There's this book by Wayne Dyer. It's called Sky is the Limit. And in that, it's a very good book. Wayne Dyer says that authoritarian people are usually very insecure. So if you see anybody authoritarian around you, including your dad, please remember there's something that he's insecure about. So I linked it up in the story saying that this man is authoritarian because he's insecure about something. And that insecurity, I just explained to you where he stood within his own family. And family was a big
mm.
business family. So this gentleman is talking to his wife, and then she's a sounding board, and she tells him, "Listen, you told me that he treats you more than an HR guy, and he seeks your advice on so many things. So maybe I know you should not just run away this time." He says, "No, no." And that is what is called as an epiphany moment that he has, you know, like Archimedes in that tub of water. And I don't tell the readers what the epiphany moment is. I keep that as a suspense.
Yeah.
And the wife sees this guy with a pink envelope in his pocket going every day to office and coming back with the envelope. And one day, a week later, she realizes the envelope is no longer there and he is in high spirits.
Mm,
So she asks
mm,
him, what happened? What was in the envelope?" Initially, the first day she asks, "No, I'll tell you later." And when the envelope is no longer
mm.
there and he's in high spirits, she says, "What happened? You look very happy." So he says, "Yes, this is what I did. My boss called me to his room and told me, 'You're carrying that damn pink envelope every day. What is it about?'" So I had to, you know, as an author, I had to bring in, because very often, if you use humor to tell an insecure person something, they accept it because their egos are very bloated. So I used humor here. So he says, I'm carrying this my resignation letter. He says, "What's wrong with you? You are more than an HR guy to me. What makes you think?" He says, "Ah, that's exactly the point. If I'm more than HR guy, I want to give you some feedback. Hey, tell me." He says, "Because you shout at everybody, and I'm getting this feeling that one day if you shout at me, I won't be able to take it. So the day you shout at me publicly, I'll just give you this envelope and walk away." So the boss laughs, comes around, picks up the envelope, takes out the resignation letter, pins it on his green board, and he throws the envelope away and tells him that letter will remind me. So that was what the so and
Yeah.
the epiphany moment really came when while they were discussing, he realized that if you threaten the worst nightmare of somebody, they change. Because his wife asked him a question:
Mm.
if somebody has imbibed a habit for 30, 40 years, why would they even change that? It's very difficult to change attitudes, Joseph. So the epiphany moment was that if you do something or show a pointer to somebody which threatens his worst nightmare, and in this case, the worst nightmare of the boss was, this is what the protagonist tells him, that what happens if somebody shouts back at you publicly? The boss mulls over it for such few seconds and then comes and takes the letter and does what he did. But that is what strikes him as his worst nightmare, that if somebody turns around and shouts back at him, this fear that he is using to control people is destroyed like a damn squib. And that's how the story evolved.
Jairam, I love this story
Mm.
because this could be true
Yes.
in somebody's life,
Yeah.
but there are so many elements you have brought in a very rhythmic and a unison manner.
Mhm.
And I read it multiple times.
Right.
So you started with a data point and a question, as you said,
Yes.
but then there is a coach or a guide in the form of wife who
Yes.
is kind of a sounding board.
Yes.
And all of us have this kind of an insecurity, and we kind of hide it in one form or the other.
Yes.
And the other person, the HR, the lead,
Mm.
he is not encountering it directly. He's
Right.
not going directly with it.
No, this is the HR.
He is
The protagonist is the HR person. That the other person is his boss, the owner.
the boss.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the protagonist.
Yes.
He is not encountering the boss directly. He
Yes.
is, as you
Yes.
said,
Yes.
with the
Yes.
humor, he is hitting indirectly and
Right.
then making that particular point.
Correct.
And it is resolved in a happy manner.
Yes.
It is not like he's quitting or any of those kinds of stuff. Or you could have ended the story in any different form,
Yes.
but it ended in a happy manner for both.
Yes.
So that's why I love this particular story. As I said, I have read this story multiple times, played this story multiple times in my mind. This is an awesome story. Now, as you said, Jairam, you had a data point and you started with a question,
Right.
and then rest of everything came in, right?
Yes. Yes.
How do you create these characters, and how do you go about writing this?
Uh, Before that, let me share a few things about story writing because I'm sure your audience
Yeah.
is more keen to do that. The opening line of the story is the most important line,
Mm.
and one has to get it right. Like, a few years or 10, 15 years ago, some of the best writers, they got together to identify which is the best opening line in the last century. And they arrived at this opening line of the story. It's by Charles Dickens. The book is A Tale of Two Cities. And the opening line is, "It
Yeah.
was the best of times, it was the worst of times." Because the whole story
Mm.
is about best of times in one country and worst of times in the other country, the two countries being England and France. So, you won't believe it, Joseph. In these 21 stories, for each story, I would have written the opening line at least 20, 25 times on each story to get it right.
Mm.
Because,
Mm. Mm.
like in movie making, a movie is made in scenes. And what is the scene? A scene is, it's a day shot, it's a night shot, it's an indoor shot, it's an outdoor shot. These are all scenes. And when a director
Mhm.
shoots these scenes, since he has all the artists and the whole infrastructure is there, sometimes because a movie, each scene is sometimes not more than 1.5 to 2 minutes. So if it's a
mm,
120-minute film, it'll have about 60 to 70 scenes. This is standard. So when the director shoots these scenes, sometimes he will shoot 90 scenes, but in the movie he'll put only 70 scenes.
mm,
Why does he decide to drop a scene? Because he will ask himself, does this scene do one of the two, or does it do both the things? If it doesn't do this, he'll drop the scene. It's very interesting. And the first thing the scene must do is it must tell the audience something more about the characters in that scene. You should need to know something more. The second thing it should also do is it must take the story forward. That's why Hollywood movies
mm,
don't have people singing and dancing around trees, because they don't move the story forward. So that's the point there. Similarly, in story writing, when you write the first sentence, the reader must want to read the second sentence. When you finish the first paragraph, he must want to read the second paragraph. Otherwise, he's got so many things around him, so many signals and distractions. Why the hell would he even invest in reading your story? So that is what I had to do in the story. I had to invest in characters. And how I write, you ask me, right? What I do is, once I've got the germ of an idea, I try to figure out, should I start with a backstory where I say it, or should I let the people in the characters talk about the backstory of somebody, like the CFO talks of that guy's handicap or his
mm, mm,
inferiority complex. There are various means of introducing information, and very important in story as in script writing. Never tell, try and show. Now, this is, if anybody who wants to write script writing, and when they go into studying script writing, they'll be told, show, don't tell. Now, what's the difference? Let's say there is this lady who walks out on a winter day, it's snowing, and I write saying that she walks out and she feels the chill, it is snowing, and it's cold, and she can feel the cold. I'm telling. But suppose I say,
mm,
when she walked out, suddenly she felt the breeze on her nose. She turned her back to the wind, and she pulled her collar up, and she touched her nose, and she found that it had become chilled up, and she was worried that it might just break and fall off. Now I'm showing. So in story writing,
mm,
also while writing, you have to have this default thing in yourself to stop yourself from getting into this habit of telling long things. So coming back to the point, I then decide, what is the theme of my story, because you have to get the theme and the premise right very early, so that everything you do, you
mm,
put it around that. So the theme of my story was, that uh, insecurity, breeds complex behavior.
mm,
And then how do you, and the premise simply is the story. There's this guy, there is his wife, there is that guy, and there's the conflict. That's the premise. So I worked around this. So the messaging, what you rightly said, that there is a mentoring element in this, is because if you preach, people don't want to hear it from you. More so this
yeah,
generation, which is quite irreverent. So you have to give it to them in a manner where they are enjoying it, and they are also trying to decipher the story with you. They are trying to
mm,
predict.
mm,
They're trying to predict with you what is the next. So if you can get the audience hooked on, whether it's a story or a movie, if the audience starts thinking with you, you got them where you want you. They won't take that cigarette break, or he will not. So I had to bring in this, that all of us face tough situations in our career and our personal life. How do you finally? So the answer lies this way: observe, reach out, share, and figure out why a person behaves the way he does, understand their insecurities,
mm,
sympathize, empathize with that, but yet try and give them feedback in a humorous way, that you have won the battle. That is the whole thing.
mm,
And that is
yes.
my whole, the template in my head for every story works in the way I've just explained.
Jairam, you have taken this into your columns also. Your columns are also in a story form. All of
Yes,
the stories, the columns are
absolutely.
also in the story form.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you write every day? Because you said, the opening line itself, you wrote 20, 25 times for each of the stories. So do
Right.
you sit and write every day? How is your process that works?
I write the first draft. If I have to write a column today, my columns are How much? 500 words, 450, 500 words, because I've got a word limit of one page on business world. While in the story also, I had to keep it to a certain limit because my plan was that in about 7 or 8 minutes, the person should be able to read one story every.
Mm,
So when I write the first draft, all good teachers will tell you just let it, vomit it out. So my first draft on a business world article of 400 words is sometimes 5,000, 6,000 words. My first draft,
mm,
because I'm just vomiting it out. You know the way it comes, and I don't follow any order, grammar, nothing. Just vomit it out. Now then, the next cut and next cut and next cut comes. I remember during my school days, I had read on Somerset Maugham had written something on how do you write a précis. The précis writing is so important. So he had said, write the first draft and put it in a drawer. 3 days later, take a red pen and strike out every third word. And then read it. It'll still make sense. You just have to have so few conjunctions here and there, but it'll still make sense. So if you write, let's say, 5,000 words, and you strike out every third word, you've brought it down to 3,000 odd words, right? And then he says, 3 days later,
yeah,
take it again and strike out every third word. You brought it down to 1,600 words, and you can still make sense of the damn thing. Put some connecting things in it. And he says, do it once more, and you're down to 400, 500 words. So I
yeah.
also do this, and
Hmm.
I also follow another thing because sometimes your brain, tells you few things that you should do and not do. I remember what I read about William Faulkner, a very big writer. He said about Ernest Hemingway. He said,
Mm,
when you read Ernest Hemingway, you don't have to reach out for a dictionary.
yeah.
So there are people who write and they think writing big words and bombastic language makes you come across as a great storyteller. No. So I follow that. So I do the same thing from 5,000 words, and it's like telling a mother, which of your children do you love the best? So I have to
Hmm.
actually eliminate a lot of things which I wanted to be in the story. Like I will bring one more character, and in the end I ask, but what is the character doing here? Like watching a
Mm,
movie, what is the character doing here? Is he adding to the story? Is he telling me anything more about the protagonist or the antagonist? If he's not, cut him out. Doesn't matter how big he is. And that is how. So my
mm,
first draft, if my deadline is, let us say, 10 days from today, I'll write the first draft today.
mhm,
3 4 days later I'll polish it. But I am one of those
mm.
guys who works great on deadlines, and on the last day I'll sit
Yeah.
and finish the story. So this is the art of story writing, as I would say, that people need to look at, and
Okay.
everybody has their own styles.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, I completely agree on that. Do you write on computer, or so this 5,000 words,
Yeah, yeah.
vomiting it
I
out?
I
All
I
of this
I, I,
happens. Okay.
everything on the laptop, and the most important thing one has to realize is, and this comes out of your own life and your own kids. Never be preachy about everything. The moment, and I use that default mode again. Am I preaching somewhere? If I am preaching, I have to eliminate
Mm,
it because the reader gets put off. My children get put
mm.
off if I preach with them. They just walk away saying, Dad, you're dated. And my reader is of that age. So he'll say, this damn author is dated.
Mm,
Why is he preaching to us? So you have to be careful about some of
mm.
these things. First line must help the reader move to the second line. First paragraph must motivate second paragraph. Opening line must be interesting. And don't preach. And show more, tell less. And that's it. And eliminate everything that doesn't make sense.
You have repeated this. I mean, we have talked multiple times, and you have said this particular thing: don't preach, don't
Yes,
preach.
yes, yes.
Uh, in almost all of the conversations that I had with you.
Right.
So I can understand how important that particular phrase is,
it,
and the
it puts
meaning is
off
for
it puts
you.
off the person, reader. And if
Mm,
moment it puts him off, and today, if you look at WhatsApp, you can see how polarized we get so quickly. Because
yeah.
like Oliver Goldsmith says in his poem, the deserted village, he says, when emotion sets in, reason flees.
Mm,
Like
mm,
I follow this in life too. If me and my spouse are having an argument and she gets emotional or I get emotional, I stop the argument, because once a person is emotional, rationality can never be injected. Similarly,
mm.
preaching makes the other person emotional. Who the hell is he to tell me about this? And then I have lost the reader.
You just taught me a lesson without preaching.
Right.
Don't fight with your wife.
That's true.
How did you develop this? Did you study this creative writing, storytelling? How did you develop this skill, Jairam?
Like I told you, I know how to tell stories because of that's the only thing I can do. A lot of my friends, my family said, "Why don't you start writing?" So what I did is I joined an online program, US program. So in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock, they would give a topic and I'd write. They would teach you the fundamentals
Mm,
first, and they give you a topic and you write. There may be 30 people from all different parts of the world, and then once you write and submit it, all 30 will critique it. Now you
mm,
imagine I am being stripped naked in that thing, because if I give it to my friend or you will be very polite because you know me. You don't want to spoil the relationship. But these 30 are there, and they say, "Oh, this is stupidity. I mean, this is like writing like an imbecile," and you got to take it. So that is the first thing that you learn. That good and the bad will come to you. You don't let it affect you. And then my
mm,
teacher, the teacher who taught me, she said, if you're keen to write, start with short stories, point number one. And she said, if you want to write short stories, first read short stories. So I said, how many should I read? She said, read between 350 to 400 short stories. So
mm,
I read 450 short stories. There are books available,
mm,
classics, of short stories. So sometimes a book will contain 100 short stories. So you buy and read. And, right from Somerset Maugham to Premchand to Guy de Maupassant to Edgar Allan Poe to Jeffrey Archer, every story I read. And
mm,
I could see the template, you know,
mm,
protagonist, strong desire, antagonist, and how the conflict, rising action, falling action, and finally the denouement. What happens? The other interesting thing I learned was there are only 5 or 6 kinds of conflicts in all stories in the world, right from Iliad, Odyssey, Mahabharata, Ramayana to what I'm writing. What are these 5 or 6 conflicts? There is the conflict between two human beings. That's the one kind of conflict.
mhm,
There's a conflict between a human being and an animal, like Jaws,
mm,
the movie where the bear runs after this guy. There's a conflict between human being and nature, where the movie Earthquake
mm,
or Mist. Then there's a conflict between the human being within themselves. So the person starts with certain values, he experiences certain things around him, maybe love that thing, so he changes. That is what we call as a character arc. You start as something and you end as something. Then there's a conflict between human beings and aliens.
mm,
So many movies you have seen, right? This is the fifth kind of conflict, and now we are getting into the zone of the sixth kind of conflict, which is between human beings and artificial intelligence,
and the machine.
machine.
Mm,
And you look at any story, look at Mahabharata, between human beings, look at that protagonist antagonist conflict. So this standard template is there. You just need to know how to use it without preaching, without boring, and
mm.
giving the audience something more to look forward to.
Lovely, lovely. I had a free session now from
Yeah.
all your learnings. So thanks, Jaira, for that. Now, one is writing as a business, a short story for a book, for a column, and not be preachy about it. But how do I use it in my daily corporate life? Can I use this in my daily corporate life?
Yes. In fact, the episodes are real, what I mentioned to you. Like there is one story where in an auto company, auto companies which sell trucks and cars, they have four regional managers. The country is divided into four major regions, and then there is one guy who does institutional selling. So he sells all over the country, and he sells to institutions like the police and that and this. The regional managers are able to give monthly targets and stick to it because they have a team that does it with the dealers. But this man, he might suddenly get an inquiry from a government for 500 trucks.
Mm,
So
mm, mm,
his boss will tell him, fine. So we are putting 500 trucks on your name. By when do you think this will happen? He says it'll happen in 3 months' time. End of 3 months, it doesn't happen. He gets his pants taken off. But the poor guy, that is not in his control as it is in the control of the
mm,
regional managers. So there was a story of this guy heading institutions who gets it always in the meetings. In the review meetings, he gets it all the time. And he is told very clearly by the CEO that, listen, if you don't meet your numbers, one of us is going to be looking for a job, and it ain't going to be me. And he was one of my colleagues who had succeeded in institution selling in some other company, big company, but here he didn't know. He was in sixes and sevens. So I told him, "What's the problem?" He says, "Boss, there is this government organization where I go. I don't even have a place to sit. And that guy gives me appointment and doesn't see me." So I said, "But then the boss, our boss, the CEO, why don't you let him get a feel of this?" He says, "No, no, I can't take him there. There's no place to sit. There's no urinal, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Listen, so long as you don't do that, he doesn't know where your shoe pinches.
Mm.
It's that come walk a mile in my shoes. And then one
Yeah.
day, I motivated him to take him there. And that guy went there and had such a horrendous experience. When he came back in the subsequent review meeting, his tone changed. It was not, "When are you going to meet the number?" He says, "Oh my God, I hope the last time you went, you were able to get some decent lunch, and I hope he met you when he called you." He completely empathetic. And that is something that book, when I
Mm.
wrote that story, many people in this corporate world wrote back to me or called me saying, "Jayaram, I used this because I realized my boss had been parachuted into that position. He had never worked
Yeah.
as a salesman and never walked the streets. So I made him come with me somewhere, and suddenly his attitudes changed because I gave him the kind of experience and problems I'm going through." So it was such a big, lesson for these guys, and they're using it. Make your
Mm.
boss walk in your shoes. He will appreciate and sympathize, empathize more with you. Do that. Doesn't matter how uncomfortable the feeling for him, but that is your life. That's what you're going through day in day out.
Yeah.
Make your life easier by making him walk in your shoes.
Okay. So that's from a sales or in one dimension, right? But let's say, for example, in my email writing,
Mm.
in my conversation with my CEO, in my presentation to the board or to my managers, how can I use the storytelling, especially the one that you talked about, show don't tell?
You see, there's a lot of information about what is a good presentation. In fact, there
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
there is there is a PowerPoint presentation called "Death by PowerPoint." It's an amazing presentation. Amazing. It says bullets don't kill
Mm.
as much as PowerPoints kill. And he's
Mm.
shown all people sitting in the
Yeah.
room in various forms of sleeping, etc. And there's another great communicator called Gar Reynolds. He settled in
Hmm.
London, in Tokyo. I followed him a lot in my presentations. He says, "You must prepare a presentation which only you can give. If anybody else catches hold of the presentation, it won't make sense to him."
Mm.
Similarly, he says, not more than 3 points, bullet points in a slide. Ideally, he says one bullet point, one visual, one bullet point. The rest you elaborate. And believe you me, I have done that because wherever you go, I speak a lot. They'll say, "Can we have a copy of the presentation? We'll put it in our computer." I give it to them. They cannot do a damn with it because there's one big visual, there is one small line, and the rest is voiceover. So practice this when you make presentations, because don't prepare a presentation with lots of lines which you then stand there and read. If you have to read, the audience
Mm.
doesn't need you. So this is the first thing that people must realize, and then ask yourself, which are the presentations that entertained you and taught you something and you learned from it. you know like David Ogilvy in one of the marketing gurus says, "Don't treat the consumer like a moron. The consumer is your
Mm.
spouse. The consumer is your spouse." So if you're making a new washing powder, give it to her launching it, and she'll tell her, "Use this and tell me." She'll use it and say, "Damn thing doesn't froth enough. It won't work." So similarly, don't treat your audience like a moron, because put yourself in the audience shoes and look at those things, experiences which you loved the presentation. You loved the TED talk. Everything starts with a story, and the best way to start a story is once upon a time. If you look in history, all classical stories, whether it is Cinderella or Red Riding Hood, starts with once upon a time. Start your story with once upon a time and see how it works for you. But ask yourself, is that what your presentation is? That something that you can sit through? If you can't, you have no right to subject somebody else to it, especially if you have senior people you're bored. Believe you me, because you, like in war, there is no trophy for runners up. The runners up gets the RIP tombstone. Similarly, when you're presenting to the board, it's like a war, damn it. There's no runners up trophy. So make sure you do it fine. But the other thing one has to
Mm.
remember in a presentation is, don't bluff. Do your research. And in every story writing session that I have gone to, first thing the story writing guru tell us is be truthful, do your research. That's why if you see
Mm.
in my stories, if I say that at the Taj Mansingh in Delhi, they went into the coffee shop so and so, I would actually Google Taj and see whether the coffee shop is still there. I may have been there 20 years ago. Like I was reading this about National Geographic, they double check every story, triple check actually. So if there is a story by somebody who's given them a story saying I was sitting in this restaurant in Nepal and I could see Kanchenjunga out of the window, peak of Kanchenjunga, they will send it to one of their stringers. Singers are people who keep contributing, not on their payrolls, but they're paid. And they'll tell them, will you go to the restaurant, sit on that seat and see whether you
Sit.
can see Kanchenjunga? So
Oh.
do your research, because I'll tell you one thing, Joseph. When you are addressing an audience, half the time they're googling to see whether what you're talking is fair or not. So why do you think the audience will not Google this? So be
Mm.
honest, do your research, and then tell your story.
Very valid point, and especially the one that you talked about presenting to the board.
Yes.
I think, if you are going to read it out, they can ask it to be read by anybody.
No,
So
no.
you are making yourself as an indispensable person by just having one point and one visual,
Yes.
and only if you can narrate it, they are going to say, Joseph, only Joseph can give this particular presentation.
Yes.
Nobody else can give it,
Nobody.
right?
And
So.
I'll tell you something. I ran an advertising agency. So
Mhm.
sometimes my creative team will come and say, we've produced one of the best ads. Headline is fantastic. I would actually call my peon and ask, run the headline through him in Hindi and say, Kya samjha? Because
Mm.
on in the print media, let me tell you, especially in the print media or in an email, if the other person doesn't get it the way you meant it to go, he will move to the next story in the paper. That
Mm.
lakhs of, and this is, I heard a story about Napoleon, and I'm sure your readers will love the story. Communication is what? It is what is in my head. I transmit it to go into your head with very little transmission losses.
Mm. Mm.
If I want to say X and it gets into your head, only 0.1x has gone into your head, I've failed in communication. So there is the story about Napoleon Bonaparte.
Mhm.
He was one of the best strategists in war, strategists, but he was never fighting in the front line. And in those days, they would fight in the daytime. In the morning, the bugle would sound, and the two people will go and fight. In the evening, there will be the beating of the retreat, so they will come back. So that in the night, the Red Cross and others can get the injured. So the rule was that we will not fight in the night. Then in the night,
Mhm.
one of the generals who was there would write down what happened during the day, and a dispatch rider on a horse will ride all the way back to Napoleon, who was in his tent. Napoleon will read what they did, what we did, this we did, we put guns here. He will then write his strategy for the next day, but he would not send it back immediately. This is the brilliance of the man. He had one of the dumbest guys in his army standing outside his tent. He will tell him to read it. And what did you understand? The first read, that guy would understand 100% diametrically opposite. Napoleon never took the trouble to explain to him, because the general Napoleon was not there to explain. He would rewrite, sometimes rewrite 15, 16 times till that guy got it close to what he meant. And then he would send it, because he knew now there would be very few interpretational errors. So when you want to communicate, you want to make a presentation, you want to send an email, please double check it the way Napoleon did it. That will the words
Mm.
I'm using, the sentences I'm using, are they going to communicate what I want to communicate? Am I communicating with least dissonance and transmission errors? Right now you're talking to me, I'm talking to you, you're nodding. If your eyeballs move this way, that way, I know I've lost you. I will come back and repeat the subject. But you don't have it when you send an email.
Mm.
So certain words decode differently. You know, I remember in one company when I was head of HR, the union guy walked into my room and I was sitting in a very, lackadaisical fashion, and he had a lot of concern on his face. And I said, "Are bhai, tell me, so what's your problem?" And I had just joined there as the head of HR, and this man went ballistic. He said,
Hmm.
even you, sir, see me as a problem. You have never experienced me. You're 6 months in this company and you also see me as a problem. I realized the word problem decoded differently. When I was using the word problem, what I meant was, kya haal hai? That man felt that the whole world had felt that he is the most difficult guy to deal with, and here is a man who's already biased against him. So I made him sit down,
Mm,
apologized, told him what I meant. Oh, he said, "Arey saab, chai mangwa lo,
mm,
sab theek hai."
mm.
So how a word decodes with the other person, you have to understand, because certain words are red flags. Nobody bothers to find out this. You just shoot it off and then understand, wonder why the other person misunderstood me.
Thanks. Uh, it's a very good MBA lesson in a short, 30-40 minutes.
Thank you,
So thanks, Jairam, for that.
thank you.
A couple of last questions, Jairam.
Yes, please.
You have interacted with many leaders,
Right,
and you have written about many leaders as well.
right.
In your opinion, what are the great qualities of some of these leaders that you admire?
Yes, I'll tell you. Man, maximum amount of leaders, they have their biggest problem is a three-letter word, ego.
Hmm.
And many of us get pitchforked into positions for which we're not fully ready. But circumstances, like the
Mm,
shelf life of a CEO in America is 2 years old, 2 years.
mm,
Sometimes the previous guy is sacked, I'm pushed. So without having all the competencies, at 60%, 70%, I am promoted. We do that in the organization all the
mm.
time. You promote an
Yeah.
assistant vice president to vice president with 60% competencies. But the mistake I start making is, oh, if I've been promoted, I have 100% of the competencies. Now let me see how soon I can get the next level. This damn ego doesn't
Mm,
let us see us the way we are, our frailties. So many
mm,
of the CEOs who are there are not really deserving of their position. They've got there because of all these things. So you have observed it, but you don't have to tell them this. Okay. Now the question is, how do you break through that ego? Like, Joseph, the one way I crack my interviews, whenever I've gone to an interview as a candidate, this is a secret I'm letting out.
mhm,
Let the interviewer speak about himself.
mm,
Find a topic which you can take it to him. And let us say in a 40-minute interview, if he speaks for 35 minutes, he's going to say, "This is a fantastic candidate," because for the first time, somebody allowed him to
mm,
speak about himself. So, coming back to the point about great leaders, those who are comfortable with themselves and their pluses and minuses, these guys make a great leader. The guys who are willing to say, "I don't know," and they're willing to learn from their subordinates. I have met leaders, traditional family owned leaders with absolutely no education, running $6 and $7 billion companies. And I have tried to understand what is there. One is their ability to attract and hold great talent. And
mm,
they make each of their reportees feel as though each one of them is special. I have had situations where MDs and CMDs and called me and told me, "We want your consulting help. Why don't you?" I said, "What is the problem?" He said, "My problem is my C level doesn't collaborate amongst each other." I said, fortunately, there was a bottle of water kept in his room. So I asked him, "Where is the neck of this bottle?" He said, "Neck of the bottle on the top." I said, "All organizations also have the bottleneck at the top. You are the bottleneck. I can't solve your problem." So he would say, "What the hell do you mean?" I said, "Every employee in this company, right from the intern to the top man, wants to feel relevant, wants to feel wanted, and wants to feel, that he's important. If you have a coterie amongst your top team, already you have destroyed teamwork and collaboration. And you just think around you and look at some of the large organizations. We can name the people who are part of the coterie of the owners." So I told them, if
I'm
you,
already going through some.
yes, so if you can, and doesn't matter how large a company, it doesn't matter if you're a manager with six subordinates, if you are an assistant manager with four subordinates, you can still practice this. Let them perceive you as being equidistant from each of them. Then they will know you, each one of them will give their best for you. So leaders who have mastered this art, and leader who is comfortable with his own weaknesses and pluses and minuses, and a leader, he knows that he doesn't have all the answers. A leader's job is to ask the right questions. We have to train our people in MBA institutions to ask the right questions because the answers are available everywhere. And the
Mm,
last thing is genuine compassion for others, not fake compassion, because that is seen through. Genuine compassion, your people will die for you and they'll kill for you.
very true.
I think these are the 4 or 5 qualities that, and you look around the broad spectrum of leaders in the world and in India, you can identify who are the, and let me tell you, when I speak on leadership, I say a great leader is somebody who doesn't have legitimate control over his people. Like if you are the CEO and you tell your team, I want you guys to come tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the morning because 8 o'clock I have to go for golf. 5 to 6, they will all turn up because that's the power of a leader, right? His ability to convene. And these guys depend on their performance appraisal on you. But the best leaders in the world, and this is again, I'm going back to Jim Collins, Good to Great. He says, in leadership, again, there are 5 levels. There's level
Yeah.
1 and level 5. He says, level 5 leader is somebody who has 2 qualities. And if he doesn't have both, he cannot be level 5. He can be level 4, level 3. To qualify for level 5, you have to have a strong will, firm will, and you must have humility.
Mm,
So if you don't have these two, don't worry. Now, the biggest leaders who had these qualities, in my opinion, I don't want to name corporate leaders because that will be biased. Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi.
mm.
He picked up his hand and the audience listened to him. So, can you be a Mahatma Gandhi? Because if you have humility and firm resolve that your objectives you want to achieve, I think these are the greatest leaders. So, I remember in the US, I was watching a program on Jim Collins' book when somebody asked Larry Bossidy, which means none of the American CEOs can ever make it to a, because none of them are humble. So
Mm.
how do you make them do that? So he said a fantastic thing. He said it's possible to make these guys who are supposed to be the worst characters in terms of ego, you can bring humility in their lives and make them level 1 leader by giving them a life changing experience. Let's say you're the biggest leader, the biggest, the most difficult guy and egoistic, but you go to the hospital one day and a doctor tells you, listen buddy, you have life
Mm.
threatening tumor in your head. You're going to count your minutes now, not even your days and years, and that will make you a little more humble. So, in a broad, I don't know whether I conveyed it, but leaders who are humble are the ones who understand that in this whole universe, irrespective of their bank balance and the people they control, they are insignificant. Now, that makes a great leader.
Wonderful. Thanks. What's the kindest thing anyone has done for you?
In my personal life, there are a lot of it, but let me talk about the work life. I had joined a company,
Hmm.
and I had come in where the C-level guys were already very close to each other. Some of them had studied together in the same college. Some of the few of them had worked together in the previous company. So it's very difficult for a new guy to fit in when you join at the C
Yeah.
level in a company, because you must remember that they are all so well bonded. What you say to one about the other will go to the other guy. It just like that it will go. And
Yeah.
enemy is my friend. So you make enemies with one, the three of them will start becoming indifferent towards you. It's not easy to actually blend and bond in a group where. So I remember that one guy in that group, who the two three of them or four of them who had bonded so well, at a board meeting in America, I remember something happened, and I know some discussions were held, and possibly there was a talk about not my pulling my weight, but my not pulling my weight and things I need to do. But they didn't give me my boss didn't give me the feedback directly. But on the way back, this gentleman, he took me aside in the airport and said, "Jayaram, I think these are 2 3 things you need to watch out for," because I was shocked. Because I thought those were 2 3 things I was doing, which was going to earn me brownie points, but I realized that it was working counterproductive. So, and I think that was a very kind thing he did for me, because he need not
Okay.
have done it.
Good. Uh, yes. What's the definition of living a good life?
Uh, it's actually very easy, and maybe today I am wiser, with age, because most of the time I was otherwise. Today I'm wise, as I would say. Uh, the first thing that you want is you want health. Don't do anything to
Hmm.
jeopardize that, because no matter what you have, if you don't have health, You are not only a pain to yourself, but you are a bigger pain to people around you. You have no right to subject them to this lack of peace by being unhealthy or getting bedridden, etc., etc. So take care of that. The second is, you want to lead a good life, you must, your part of your DNA must be gratitude for what you have.
Mm, mm,
We try and compare with people who have a lot of wealth, etc., because we don't know what's actually going on in their lives. We only see the wealth, but within their life there's a divorce, the son has beaten his father, extreme things happen. But be gratitude for what you have. So look at those who are not so well off from you, and then thank God, or somebody up there saying that I have got much more than what I want, and I've got much more than what I deserve. This is the feeling that you must carry with you every day. I'm trying to be philosophical because that's worked for me. And the third is, uh, never, never, never exploit another human being. In the corporate world, this happens so often because it all
very
comes
true.
back. And the fourth, if I may say, in COVID days, when you have seen so many of your friends and relatives and close ones, just overnight you get news that he's dead. When you get up in the morning and see the sun shining, and I do this when I play golf, I offer a silent prayer that thank you very much. I am at least today seeing this. So again, gratitude. I think if this is there, living in the moment and all the family, friends, all that will follow with all this, because then all the other nonsensical thoughts never come to you. I think gratitude is a very big thing to your friends, your
Very true.
family, and everybody around you.
Thanks, Jairam. I know you are writing a column
Mm.
in the business world.
Yes.
Other than that, where can people find you online?
Well, my LinkedIn, I post a lot of interesting stuff there. I'm doing
Okay.
this podcast. I'm going to be doing a series of podcasts with Business World again, on short
Okay.
podcasts on elements of what happens in organizations. And I am on Twitter, and I am on LinkedIn, and they can they read my book. So I would like to say, last ending, since you know in my book I've given my thing, but if you want to seriously write, because like in golf there are so many coaches and so many videos, it will ultimately short circuit your brain. You will never be able to play good golf.
Hmm.
The two things that helped me, I'm sharing my experiences. There's a book by John Truby. It's called Anatomy of a Story. If you are a serious reader, like the first thing is read a lot, like I did. Read this book end to end, John Truby's book. And in 2019, I went to London to attend a course by a guy called Robert McKee, 3-day workshop.
Hmm.
He's 75 years
Yeah.
old, and he does these 3-day workshops, 7, 8 of them all over the world. In the last 30 years, about 70 of his students have won Oscar awards for some of the marquee movies. And
Mm.
he's got a book called Story, which is about screenwriting and story writing. So John Truby's book, John Truby, T for Toronto, Truby, Truby's book, Anatomy of a Story, and Robert Mackey, Mckee. The book is called Story. And go on YouTube. There are so many stories that these guys, they're part of their books they share in YouTube. Only look at these two and work hard, do research, and be truthful. Well, that's what I have learned.
Thanks, Jairam. Uh, I will put all of these things in the show notes. And when you start your podcast, and good luck for your podcast.
Thank you.
And when you start it, please share it. I will also put that. I'll go back and update the links.
Yes,
Jairam, you talked about gratitude,
yes.
and I cannot be more thankful to you for sharing all of your experiences with me in story writing and in life and in corporate and everything. I'm extremely thankful for
You
that.
know why I did it?
Thank you, Jairam.
But do you know why I did
Hmm.
it? First of all,
Tell
thank
me,
you.
Jairam.
Thank you. You're being very kind by saying that. I have realized one thing, that, in my own life, there were points in life when people have helped me. They have helped me, held my hand. When I've gone into a river and stuck in the middle of the river, somebody has helped my hand. They have shared their experiences. So, out of gratitude for what they have done for me, I have decided that wherever I have an opportunity, I will share some of these things that I've learned and experienced. And if it helps people, fine. If they dismiss it off as all skullduggery, I can't. I don't have control on that. But that's the only reason why I do more of this all the time.
Jairam, to every guest, I ask this particular question: what's the kindest thing that anyone has done for you, and they will narrate something like what you have
Mhm.
done. And almost everyone would say what you have said. I'm paying it
Right,
forward in one form or the
right,
other.
right,
And
right.
that is why the world is still livable
Absolutely, bang on.
among all the polarization that is happening.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely,
I'm
absolutely.
extremely thankful, Jairam, for being a nice, I'm a gem of a person and sharing all of the details with me, Jairam.
Well,
Thank you very much.
I'm grateful that you chose to have me on the show. I'm truly grateful for that, Joseph. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Please share what you liked in our conversation on social media and tag us. Have life of wins.